your news, your neighborhood, live and interactive. This is Fox 29 Weekend.
And it's 8:06. Our cover story this morning, there are proposed changes for schools in Pennsylvania. A bill would create a new state-run district for schools that don't meet standards and are classified as underperforming. As soon as people heard about this, they started responding and speaking online. Jordy wrote, do you go into your local doctor, lawyer, or even car mechanic and tell them how to do their job because you know better? And another person wrote, state control never works. It's been proven every time. But we want to discuss it. Chris McGinley from Public Citizens for Children and Youth and Mike Wang, Executive Director of Philadelphia School Advocacy Partners, join us. And gentlemen, good morning. Thanks for spending some time with us.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Chris, let's start with you because you oppose this concept, correct? Now, yes. On the surface, seemingly seizing underperforming schools and kind of allowing for some revolutionary change seems like it's not a bad idea. So tell me why it is.
I think revolutionary change has to come in the form of supports to those schools, and that the schools that we're talking about are in desperate need of funding, adequate funding, and stability. And that creating some new infrastructure to impose some kind of level of guidance or support would be a costly investment in something that's not necessary, that targeted funds that go right to the school are what we need at this time.
Mike, is it necessary? We always hear about funding, but do we need more extreme changes?
Well, you know, Chris and I agree that we need more resources in Philadelphia. In fact, we are advocating for this proposal as part of a broader effort to bring more resources for all students. But history has been clear on this point, and that is that even when we bring more resources, students who are trapped in the lowest performing schools, the chronically underperforming schools, don't reap the academic benefits of those resources. What this proposal would do would be ensure that the new resources coming to Philadelphia are used to help those students who need it most.
Yeah, that is one of the things that we often hear. You hear that administrations or districts are kind of tied by law. You hear that principals can't make the changes that they need to make. Do you need kind of an outside entity to empower them and to change things?
Well, the thrust of this proposal is really about empowering local school districts, empowering those principals, empowering superintendents to address in a transformative way their lowest performing schools.
Chris, you want to respond?
I mean, the language around these kinds of proposals is always about empowering the local people, but that's not the case. I mean, Pennsylvania has numerous examples of state takeover that have been unsuccessful, including Chester Upland School District right down the street. What needs to happen is that the school districts need adequate funding overall. We haven't been in that place based on state funding in a very long time. The poorest school districts are the lowest funded school districts in the state, and it's an embarrassing national model that we're confronting that at this time. So putting in place some new costly infrastructure that doesn't exist at the Department of Education and doesn't exist in the local school district would be an investment of funds in absolutely the wrong place. We're talking about schools that have inadequate resources, that don't have adequate supervision, that don't have school nurses, that don't have toilet paper and bathrooms, and to create some costly infrastructure in Harrisburg that is under the pretense of oversight and innovation is really the wrong way to go.
Now, costly infrastructure, and I get you, but costly infrastructure aside for a second, I want both of you to respond to one of the tweets that we got. When the state comes in, we don't have a good record of things changing for the positive. What reason do we have to believe, again, resources aside, that some sort of independent entity that's not necessarily on the ground in those districts will make anything any better?
Well, the data and history is very clear on this. If you look back 10 years ago, the schools that today are in the lowest performing 1% in the city of Philadelphia have seen a 35% increase in per pupil funding. That's 1.5 times the rate of inflation. Yet academic outcomes have gotten worse in those schools. 10 years ago, 25% of the students in those schools were reading and doing math. Today, that's only 24%. The lesson here is that resources alone are not enough to make changes in our lowest performing schools. We have to couple those resources with real changes to the way those schools operate.
Chris, I only got 10 seconds. Last word.
That's incorrect information. When we take a look at one of those schools, Harding Middle School, for example, it's been buffeted by the underfunding in Pennsylvania. It's had to absorb hundreds of students from schools that are closed. Every day it has to take students that should rightfully go to charter schools that are located nearby that have a special exception and don't have to take kids who move in the course of the school year. It destabilizes the local school district when we have special rules for charters that don't apply to all schools, and that is in the 1% category, but it's a school that's been buffeted by systemic changes and blows and chronically underfunding.
Yeah, we got to leave it there. Gentlemen, thank you. This legislation is still going to have to work its way through, so we'll see ultimately what happens with it, and we'll have you back at some point in the future.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. So tell us what you think, guys. Do we need to have some sort of a separate entity to come in and address the problems that we're seeing in local school districts? You can leave your comments on our Facebook page. You can tweet us at Fox 29 Philly. Just make sure you always use the hashtag Fox 29 Weekend.